Welcome to The Porch Online. We're so excited that you're joining us this week. If you're close enough to The Porch, we want to invite you to come join us in person. And if you're not, we're going to encourage you to join a local church in your community, because here at The Porch, we believe gathering is extremely important, because we believe that you can go fast alone, but you'll go farther together. We hope that you enjoy this week's message and learn something new about God. Well, good morning, everybody. So glad to see you today. If you don't know who I am, my name is Cooper. I am the pastor of the Porch Community Church, and I'm really excited that you are joining us here today. I just went outside and I forgot my allergy medicine this morning, so you have to forgive some of the coughing. I apologize. It's a beautiful day, beautiful springtime, but also those of us with allergies, we know the suffering that comes with that, right? But in all seriousness, we're so glad that you're here with us this morning at the porch for Easter to celebrate the risen King Jesus. It is truly the only reason we come together on Sunday mornings and we share our faith, the reality of what Jesus has done, who Jesus is, and how he has changed each and every one of our lives. Those of us that follow him and chase after him. And man, we're so excited to celebrate that this morning. And if you're joining us online, welcome to the Porch Online. We're so excited to have you be a part of the Porch family. If you're close enough, feel free to join us in person. And if you're not, find a local community around you, because we believe here at the Porch that we can go fast alone, but we'll go farther together. And that's something that we're really passionate about. You saw the go up there, but we believe gathering is the number one priority for us to be able to grow, give back, and go, because it really brings us together and strengthens us as believers. So as I'm sitting here this morning, I'm thinking a little bit about one of my favorite movies. And before I get into the movie, I want to invite you to join us and follow along. Either on the back of your flyer, there is a QR code that you're able to scan and follow along on your phone, or you can write notes on the back of your flyer as well. So whatever you like, pen or paper or cell phone, you're more than welcome to follow along with us. But has anybody in the room seen the movie Drumline before? Yes, Nick Cannon. One of my best friends in the world. He lives in South Carolina now. He was in the Drumline growing up. I was not. I can't drum to save my life. I have zero rhythm. That is the reason why I am out here singing and not playing an instrument, because you don't want to see any part of that. Maybe one day I'll be able to sing and play instruments, but I think it's a misnomer. I can sing, just not well. Yeah, that's what it is. My poor wife has to listen to me sing every morning in the shower, so she's probably more than happy to let me go somewhere else than right next to her when we're worshiping. But anyway, it's not even the point of the story. Drumline, awesome movie. Maybe it was because something that I couldn't do growing up, and I loved watching my buddy play the drums. He played the bongos, he played percussion, did all sorts of different things, and so I really got into this movie. And there's this scene in this movie where Nick Cannon is at homecoming, and he's on the drum line, and he's drumming along, and the guy from the other side, the other drum line that's challenging them, is kind of getting under his skin, kind of getting in his face a little bit. He's kind of getting in his head. He's that guy on the drum line that maybe like me as an athlete, I wasn't like the top tier athlete that was going Division I, that was scoring 25 points a game. I was the guy that was to get in the other team's head. I was the guy that just like talked the smack, that threw some elbows every now and then. I was that guy. So that's what this guy was doing, and he gets in Nick Cannon's head. Nick Cannon drops his drumsticks and throws a punch. Punches the guy right in the face when they're just having a friendly drum-off. And the thing about this moment was, it's homecoming. Nick Cannon's girlfriend is there, and she's going to introduce her parents to him. Well, after the fight's over, and after the game's over, they're walking out from where they're at with the drum line. Nick Cannon's walking up to his girlfriend to meet her parents, and her parents start to whisper about him. They're talking about like, oh, that kid that did this, blah, 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 like making her feel like this is such a bad kid. This is such a bad guy. I don't want to be around this guy. I don't want to talk to him. And this girl who is in love with Nick Cannon, hears her parents talking like this, and she turns and grabs him and says, "Come on, let's go." After she makes eye contact with Nick Cannon, he smiles and waves at her because he's expecting to meet her parents, and she turns around and pretends like she doesn't know who he is and walks away. So the next day, they're in the cafeteria. They're in their dorm cafeteria, and they're getting food, and the girl walks up to Nick Cannon and says, "Hi." And he goes, "Oh, now you can see me." How many of us have been in that place where it's like somebody that we love, right, that we're friends with, they treat us one way when we're alone, but when we're in front of a group of people that's a little bit different, like they want to be cool for that group, but not necessarily for you. They don't want to admit you. I can say that I've been on both sides of that. Not proud of the fact that I was somebody that pretended like I was one way. Actually, the exact same friend that I was talking about, one of my best and oldest friends, I was dating a girl, and I ignored him completely. And the crazy part was, he actually introduced me to the girl. We were all supposed to be friends, but like when we were all around, we just ignored him and pretended like he didn't exist. We acted differently, and that's not something that I like to brag about because I'm not proud of it, but I know how it feels on both sides, right? On both sides of the coin, sometimes you might be a little embarrassed and you're like, well, will my family accept my friend? Or will this group of friends accept my friend? Or so on and so forth, or vice versa. But we all know how that feels to be kind of denied. To be kind of like, you're not good enough, right? You're not who I thought you were. Or because I'm with this group of people, it's not worth my time to acknowledge you. Luke, I wouldn't do that to you. But we're going to come back to that story, but I want you to have it in your mind as we continue to go, because we're here for one specific, very, very specific reason, is we are here to celebrate the risen King Jesus who is seated on a throne in heaven. But let's go through the timeline of what this week actually looked like leading up to today. So, the very first thing that we see is Jesus is arrested. Jesus was arrested in John chapter 18, verse 12 through 13. Then the detachment of soldiers with its commander and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus. They bound him and brought him to Ananias, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. So Jesus was arrested. The very next thing that happened later in that morning, because it was like late at night, so the next morning, Jesus was sentenced. We see that in John 19, verse 15 through 16. It says, "But they shouted, 'Take him away, crucify him.' Pilate, who wanted nothing to do with this, if you read different gospel accounts, Pilate was like, 'I can set you free. I don't want to do this.' Jesus is like, 'Well, you don't have the authority to do anything but what God lets you do,' right? But Pilate's wife even comes up to him and is like, 'Leave this man alone. I've had terrible dreams all night long.' And Pilate doesn't want to do this. He wants to get rid of him and get him, like, rid of him in the sense of not killing him, but like get him out of there so that he doesn't die. And Pilate says, 'Shall I crucify your king?' And they responded, 'We have no king but Caesar.' The chief priest answers." Now, these are the people that are supposed to know the scriptures. And the scriptures tell us very clearly that you're not supposed to have any other king than God. So these are the people not only in the midst of this moment where they're trying to crucify Jesus, they haven't recognized Yahweh incarnate in person, and they're not only not recognizing Jesus as Yahweh in person, they're actually even denying the fact that Yahweh is their king and saying that some man seated on some throne in some empire far away that they probably have never been to or never go to is their king now. And finally, Pilate just decided, in other gospel accounts, he says, "I'm not going to do it, you can do it." And he gives them permission to kill Jesus. So he hands him over. Next thing we see is Jesus was crucified. There they crucified him with two others, one on each side and Jesus in the middle. You see, I think sometimes Some of us that maybe don't come to church often, or we just come to church to check a thing off the box on Easter Sunday or Christmas Sunday. We come to check that box. We think to ourselves, well, I show up once on Christmas or Easter, and now I'm good for the rest of the year, for the next half of the year, whatever that looks like. But I want to point out that it had nothing to do with what you got right. Because one of these two men that was crucified next to Jesus looks over at Jesus as both of them are hanging there, suffering and dying. And he asks Jesus, remember me when you enter your kingdom. And Jesus looks at him. And here's the crazy part. When you're on the cross, you're dying of asphyxiation. So to be able to take a breath, you have to lift yourself up. So he had to lift himself up on these nails to tell this man, today you will be with me in paradise. That man did nothing right. Actually, as a matter of fact, he did everything wrong. He landed himself on the cross. He wasn't just your typical thief. He was really bad. He got executed for what he did. And Jesus said to him, today you will be with me in paradise. The next thing I want to stop and pause on is Jesus laid down his life. Nobody took it from him. Nobody killed him. He chose to die for you and for me and for all of creation. All of creation was restored in a moment when Jesus laid down his life. We see in John chapter 10, verse 18, it says, no one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. In John 19:30, he also says, when he had received the drink, Jesus said, it is finished. And with that, he bowed his head and gave up his life. He chose to die. You see, 3 nails didn't hold Jesus on the cross. What held Jesus on the cross was you and me. Because he tells Peter at one point in time that, do you not know that I could call legions of angels and my Father would send them? See, Jesus went to the cross, laid down his life, stayed on the cross, not because somebody nailed him to it, but because he chose to do it for me and for you. After Jesus lays down his life, he was buried. In John 19:40-42, taking Jesus' body, the two of them wrapped it up with the spice in the strips of linen. This was in accordance with Jewish burial customs. At the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden, a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. Because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. Jesus was buried. He was put in a tomb, a rock rolled in front of it. Some other things happened to make sure the rock was sealed. There were guards standing there, and here's the cool thing. With the rock being sealed, with 2 Roman guards standing there, Jesus rose again. It says in John chapter 20, verse 6-8, it says, then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first went inside. He saw and he believed. Now, if you have been to an Easter service, you're probably thinking to yourself, this was the fastest service ever. Let's go home, let's eat some food, let's get some free family pictures, right? We've heard the story before. And the story is the only reason we come to church every single Sunday. It's the only reason we believe what we believe. It is the most important and integral thing in the Christian faith, the reality that Jesus died for our sins. He laid his life down, he was buried, and he rose again. Paul tells us in one of his books that if Jesus didn't rise again, all of this would be worthless. And I would tell you that you should just stay home, sleep in on Sunday, enjoy the Masters, and have a great time eating with your family. But the reality is Jesus rose again. But what does that even matter? Right? We know it matters. We talk about it mattering. But why does it matter for me? Why does it matter for you? Well, we have to go back through the story to figure this out. And we have to focus on one very specific person. And that person we just got introduced to is Peter. Peter's my favorite disciple for various reasons. I feel like I really relate to Peter because he's loudmouth. He says the wrong things at the wrong times, but he's super passionate and fiery. And sometimes, Victoria probably would be able to tell you that. That's me. I'm passionate, I'm fiery, and sometimes I say the wrong thing. And I chase, after Jesus with all that I have, and then sometimes I slip up and I'm rude to somebody driving down the street. But what I want to go through this story about is so important because I think Peter shows us 4 places that any believer or any person can be in at any given moment in time. In the first place, he shows us, he says, maybe you have a strong relationship with Jesus. You see, Peter had a strong relationship with Jesus. So strong, in fact, in John 13:33-34, it says, Jesus says to all of his disciples, "My children, I will be with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and just as I told the Jews, so I tell you now, where I am going, you cannot come. A new command I give to you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Simon Peter asked him, "Lord, where are you going?" If he was going to tell him where he was going, I think he probably would have just said it. So he repeats himself. I feel like my dad had to do this a lot with me growing up. But it says, Jesus replied, "Where I am going, you cannot follow, but you will follow later." Peter asked the Lord, "Why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you." You see, Peter had such a strong relationship with Jesus in that moment that he was willing and ready to die. Right then, right there. He said, "I will certainly lay down my life for you. I'll do it. I'll give up everything for you in this moment." And Jesus answered, "Will you really lay down your life for me? Very truly, I tell you, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times." But in that moment, Peter was serious. Peter meant it. Jesus saw what was coming, but Peter wanted to lay down his life. He wanted to be there with Jesus, for Jesus. He was in a strong relationship with Jesus. Maybe that's you when you walked in this building today. Maybe you have that strong relationship with Jesus, that you're willing to give up everything to follow him. You see, when I was a high school teacher, they actually are very adamant in the public schools for you not to share your faith. I got to the point where I just said, I don't care. I don't care. I want to tell people about Jesus. When my students asked me what I did on the weekend, I would say, I went to church Sunday. Praised God, my wife and I. I got to preach this weekend. I got to do this weekend. I had the opportunity to share Jesus with them in school. I was willing to lay down everything for the gospel. I was willing to lay down everything for Jesus. Maybe you're at the next place that we see, and maybe you're willing to fight for Jesus. It says, then Simon Peter, this is when Jesus was going to be arrested, then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant. Cutting off his right ear, Jesus commanded Peter, "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink from the cup my Father has given me?" Maybe that's you. Let's be honest, we're in a crazy world. It's a broken world. It's dark. It needs Jesus. I mean, that's why he came. And he literally, you're online, you're seeing these things, and maybe you're saying things to people. You're fighting for Jesus. And I'm not telling you don't stand up for what you believe in. Hear me, that's not what I'm saying. But what I'm talking about is when you're aggressive and tearing people down and going after who people are and attacking them and fighting against them, maybe that's where you're at. Or maybe you're like one of my friends who is now saved, but when he grew up in the Bible Belt, and he went to church like once a year. And he said, if you said a bad thing about Jesus, I'd be willing to punch you right in your teeth, and I didn't even know the guy, right? Maybe that's where you're at today. Maybe you don't know anything about Jesus, but you know that your mom and dad told you needed to go to church at least on Christmas and Easter. And if anybody were to talk bad about Jesus, and you'd be ready to fight them. You wouldn't know why other than like your mom and dad, right? Wanted you to fight for Jesus and for your faith, right? Peter was there. I've been there. I've been in both of the places that we're talking about. I've been in both of those places where I was willing to fight for Jesus and act like some crazy maniac Monday through Saturday and show up to church on Sunday morning and pretend like I knew Jesus, but I was ready to fight anybody that said anything negative about Jesus. I was ready to tell them they were wrong. I was ready to tell them why they were wrong. And if they wanted to keep going, I was willing to fight for Jesus. Maybe you're like Peter here, and maybe you are denying Jesus. He said, 12-year-old girl comes up to him, a servant. Now, if you laugh at that when you think Peter gets scared of a 12-year-old girl, you haven't been around middle school girls very often, all right? They're mean. I can say that as a former teacher. They can be bullies. No, all kidding aside, she said to him, "You aren't one of this man's disciples too, are you?" She asked Peter. He replied, "I am not." That's John 18:17. And then two more times we see John 18 through 25. John 18, verse 25 through 27. Peter denies Jesus. Maybe that was you. Maybe you were telling your coworker on Friday, "I can't come watch the Masters with you," or "I can't go golfing with you because I've got to go to church on Sunday with my wife or with my husband." Whatever it may be, and they looked at you and they were like, "Oh, you're a Christian?" And you're like, No. My wife, my husband, they want me to come to church. This is the one time a year I have to, but I'm not a Christian. No, I'm not that. I don't follow Jesus." Maybe that's where you're at. Maybe you came into this place and you're like, "I don't follow Jesus, but I do come to church twice a year because I got to check the box off. I got to do the right thing." And you're sitting there like Peter was, saying, I don't follow Jesus. I'm not really a Christian. I'm a Christian, but I'm not a Christian, right? I'm going to church this Sunday, but I don't really follow Jesus. Maybe you're in this place and you've gone back to your old life. Maybe you're sitting here today in this exact moment in your seat thinking to yourself, "I've gone too far to be here." Can I tell you, Simon Peter did that too? He said, "I'm going out to fish," Simon Peter said. This is not a condemnation if you like to fish, okay? If you go fishing, that's fine. But here's what Peter's saying. Peter used to be a fisherman. Jesus called Peter out from being a fisherman and said, "Today, you will now be a fisher of men." You will no longer go catch fish for a living, but for the rest of your life, you will be sharing me with people. You will be inviting people into the kingdom of heaven. You will be pursuing people and making sure that you bring them to me. And Peter says, after he's gone so far, after he's denied Jesus and feels like he can't come back, "You know what? I'm not good enough, so I need to go back to what I used to know." And maybe you're in this room today and you're thinking to yourself, "I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough, so I need to go back to that alcohol. I need to go back to that drug addiction. I need to go back to that image on the screen." Maybe you've gone back to those things and you're sitting here and you're struggling with a sin that you're keeping quiet, that you're hiding from people. And you've gone back to that old lifestyle and you don't understand why you've gone back to that old lifestyle, or you feel like, "I'm gone too far because Jesus doesn't want me anymore." You see, just like Peter, who went back to fishing when Jesus said, "You are no longer a fisherman, but you are a fisher of men." You feel like, "I've done too much. I've gone too far." I want to share with you, this is what Jesus would say to you. No matter what place you are, no matter which four of these things you are, he would say in John chapter 21, verse 7 through 12, they had been fishing all night. They didn't catch anything. And this man is standing on the shore and he says, "Throw your net out the other side of the boat." They catch so many fish, and John leans over to Peter. He says, "Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, 'It is the Lord.' As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, 'It is the Lord,' he put back on his clothes and dove into the water." I would have probably left my clothes off to be dry so that when the boat got to shore, I didn't have to sit in wet clothes. But that's just Peter. So he jumps into the water. He swims back to shore as fast as he can. The other disciples stayed in the boat and dry, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire burning, coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you have caught." Simon climbed back into the boat, dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153, but even with so many, the net was not torn. And this is what Jesus would say to you today. No matter where you're at along the path that Peter so eloquently laid out for us, he would say to you, Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." I don't know how you walked into this room. I don't know if you have a strong relationship with Jesus. I don't know if you're willing to fight for Jesus. I don't know if you're in the midst of denying Jesus. And I don't know if you're struggling with going back to your old life. But I do know this. No matter where you're at, no matter what you've done, no matter how many boxes you check, no matter how good you think you are, or how bad you think you are, Jesus says this one thing and this one thing only. Hey, why don't you come have breakfast with me? Why don't you come sit with me? Why don't you come into relationship with me? Why don't you come get to know me? You see, in the Jewish culture, Peter had done too much. If he denied any other rabbi, he's out. Never welcome back again. But Jesus invites him to one of the most intimate things that you can do with another human being, to share a meal, to have fellowship, to be in relationship. And he extends that same invitation to you and to me today. So with every head bowed and every eye closed in this moment, if you relate to any of these four places, or maybe you've never accepted Jesus as your Lord and Savior in your entire life, all Jesus is saying is come and have breakfast with me. The Bible tells us that we've all fallen short of the glory of God, myself included, the people behind me included. None of us excluded from falling short of his glory. But it said that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us so that we could have a relationship with him. See, unlike Nick Cannon, who was all angry at his girlfriend for denying him, Jesus isn't angry at you. He's inviting you back. He's calling you home. And he's saying all you have to do is say yes to me. The Bible tells us that if we confess with our mouths and we believe in our hearts that Christ is Lord and Savior, that we shall be saved. So as you're thinking and as you're sitting here, if you are where you're at right now, I can tell you you're not too far away. And if you think you're so good that you're beyond, needing help from Jesus, can I tell you that it doesn't matter how good you are. There's only one way to heaven, and it's Jesus. And that's the importance of today. That's the importance of the cross, the burial, and the resurrection. That's what Jesus did for you and for me. So on the count of three, if you say, I want that right relationship with Jesus, I want to come back into that place where we're having a relationship, where we're having breakfast, where we're communing together, we're in relationship. And you want to say, I'm not too far, God. I know you can do miracles. I know you bring forgiveness. I know that I was an enemy, and every single person in this room, nobody's better than another. But Jesus died for all of us. If that's you today, I'm going to count to 3. I'm not going to have you run forward. I'm just going to ask you to raise your hand so I can see you, because the reality is we were created to do life together. Follow Jesus together. So I want to know you, and I want to invite you into this family today. So if that's you, 1, Jesus loved you so much that he stayed on the cross and laid down his life for you. 2, he loved you far too much to stay dead, that he came back to life. 3, if you want a relationship with him, raise your hand in this room right now. Jesus, thank you. Just praise you. Jesus, we just thank you for the people who know you in this room. And God, let us reflect as we go through this last song today on who you are and what you've done. As we sing forever, you're glorified. Forever, you're lifted high. Let that be the anthem of our life as we leave from here, as we invite people back into this place to know you more and have this relationship with you, Father. We thank you. Amen.
If you just prayed or have any questions at all, please let us know.